Welcome to the Dynamics of Everyday Life, where we demystify some tricky concepts and get to know ourselves a little bit better. Welcome back to the Dynamics of Everyday Life. As I prepare for this episode, here in the UK we're experiencing a rare moment of summer. The skies are blue and we can finally see the sun. Obviously that means that in a couple of days' time there'll be a lot of pink and sunburnt people walking around, but reminding everyone to wear their SPF is not what this podcast is about. And by the time that this goes out, we'll be back to a traditional British summer of unpredictability. How does the weather link with what I'm talking about today? Well, being British clearly means that I have a natural inclination to refer to the weather at any given moment. But that's not the link. The link is around summer holidays and how we feel about them. There's the widely held view that we all long for our 2 weeks in the sun, and that we should be enjoying the lazy, hazy days of summer. But how much is that actually our reality? I was prompted to think about this when I visited my best friend and my 12-year-old godson recently. I was talking to him about what he was looking forward to over the summer and what he wanted to do, and he said, "I'm glad we aren't going away. I'd rather be at home. I'm happy here." This stopped me in my tracks, as it took me right back to when I was a teenager and I really didn't want to go away, as it ramped up my anxiety. I'm not saying I wasn't happy when I got on holiday or that we didn't have good times, because we did. I just remember that feeling of dread before we went and how I'd much rather have stayed at home. This made me think, if I'd felt this way, and my godson had also felt it, then perhaps it's something that a lot of other people experience too. I did a bit of research around this, just to check it wasn't the two of us having a psychic link-up moment, and it turns out that we're absolutely not alone in this. A lot of people do find holidays stressful. Here are some of the top reasons. Travel anxiety. This one I can really relate to, especially around flying. In a previous episode I've touched on my fear of flying and how my beloved friend Steve had tried to cure me of my phobia by arranging for us to visit the cockpit of a flight back from Dublin, which helped, until Concorde blew up the following week. For many people it's about the feeling of being out of control, and maybe being cooped up with a lot of strangers. And the odd disaster film or TV series doesn't help either. We can also get anxious about what will happen when we're there. Will I like the food? What happens if I become unwell? How do I find help if I need it? There's fear of the unknown. Unless we've been somewhere before, we don't know where we're going, and that uncertainty has the power to create anxiety. Not for everyone. Some people will love the thrill of the unknown, and others need to have a bit more reassurance that everything will be okay. For younger people this can be amplified, especially for those going through puberty, which is an uncertain time as it is, with all the hormones racing around their bodies, not knowing how they're going to be feeling from one day to the next. Our brains hate a vacuum, so if we don't have the answers, our brains will fill in the gaps. And as we're biased towards the negative as a way to survive, then it's unlikely we're going to be filling the gaps with anything good. There's being out of our routine. This is potentially increased if you or one of your travelling party are neurodivergent, or if you're a family with small children who thrive on routine. I'm quite open that I'm a parent to a neurodivergent child. What this means for our holidays is that we have to plan everything down to the last minute. Where we're going on what days, where we'll be eating that evening, what's our itinerary going to be? Until we understood about the neurodivergence, our holidays were quite stressful, as coming out of the routine meant huge overwhelm for our child, but we couldn't comprehend why meltdowns were occurring, and he was surviving for a week on bread, chips and ice cream. The diet isn't a huge amount better at home, but at least I get it now. Being away from work or your home environment does not mean being away from your worries. Unless you win the lottery when you're away, chances are you're going to have to return to your previous life and routine once your fun in the sun comes to an end. Whilst we're at home, we can be looking forward to our holidays. When we're on our holiday, we know what we're returning to. And we can have more time on our hands to consider where we are and what we're doing with our lives. There's also the very real phenomena that when you stop your everyday activities, that the stress and exhaustion catches up with you, and instead of feeling bouncy and ready to go, you end up collapsing on your sun lounger, feeling wretched. Travelling companions. This is such an interesting one. Some people love to go away for big family holidays, and some people don't. There can be all kinds of expectations placed on people to go on holiday together, and what constitutes a holiday for one person can be somebody else's idea of hell. How much do you want to compromise when you're on holiday? It can be similar to the stress that people feel around Christmas, except on this occasion you aren't fighting Uncle Jonny for the last potato. You're avoiding pointed looks from your relatives as you allow your child ice cream every day, fretting about how you look in a bikini and wondering whether a couple of extra trips to the gym would have actually made a difference. This list isn't exhaustive. I'm sure there are many more reasons as to why holidays might make us feel more stressed than excited, and for some people these can be deeply personal. The key theme here is that they cause us anxiety, and if we look to our psychodynamic theory, we know that we really don't want to feel anxiety. And what do we do when we want to avoid feeling anxiety? We bring out our defence mechanisms. Which ones do we think we might see here? Bingo cards at the ready. One that we might experience either before we go away or when we are away is regression. Regression is where we return to a more infantile state of our development in order to avoid feeling our current anxiety. This mechanism is not without its problems though, as when we regress we often come up against the struggles that we had at that stage of our development. An example here might be the anxiety that is caused when having to book tickets, flights, connections and hotels, etc. Instead of us having to go through the stress of doing it for ourselves, it's a lot easier for us to regress into our younger selves and construct a situation where we're not able to do it, for whatever reason. We can then quite legitimately ask, require, or demand that someone else sorts it out for us. We don't have to go through the stress of sorting it out ourselves. The challenge here for us then becomes, how do we come back to our starting point? It could be quite tempting for us to stay in a position where we get people to do things for us, but this can lead to resentment and challenges further on. Have a think about when a particular task has caused you anxiety, and if you've regressed to encourage someone to do something for you. How did you feel in this encounter? Another one that might come up for us is repression. This key defence mechanism is where we squish down into the unconscious all the things that we don't want to think about because they make us uncomfortable. What then often occurs is that these unacceptable thoughts get swished around in the unconscious, remember that's an active environment, and will bubble up in all kinds of ways, often known as the return of the repressed. This can lead to symptoms developing. Thinking back to when we had Narinder Sheena on the show a few episodes back, Narinder talked about chronic pain, and this can often be a message from the body that things aren't going well psychologically for us. We can experience all kinds of symptoms that are actually repressed thoughts making themselves known to us. Obviously get checked out by a doctor if you have any form of symptom that worries you, but if there is no medical explanation, then chances are you could have repressed something, and your body isn't letting you forget this. When we're thinking about holidays, this can be all kinds of things, from a bit of resentment that your partner chose a location this time and not you, to panic at the thought of going somewhere that you've never been before and don't know what to expect. Projection is another favourite that can come out at holiday time. We might have all kinds of uncomfortable feelings about new people, cultures and places. We might feel that our choices and our way of life is misunderstood when we go away. And perhaps we don't like these biases that pop up for us. So what we do when this happens is that we project this into other people. We decide that other people are carrying these thoughts and judgments about us. It's not us at all. We can then continue feeling perhaps a little bit self-righteous in our way of being. Turning this idea on its head, we can also have the opposite situation, travel escapism. This is where we're travelling to avoid anxiety. We could probably tick denial off our bingo card here. What better way to deny that we have certain issues and challenges going on for us by being in a different place, country, or even continent to our home? Because we can tell ourselves that if we aren't actually in the place where the problem is occurring, then we don't have to allow it into our conscious minds. We can pretend that it doesn't exist. If you've won the lottery, then all well and good. But this is unlikely for a lot of people. So chances are that you're going to have to come home at some point. My invitation for you this week is to consider how you feel about going on holiday. Do you start to get edgy at the thought of it? Does it bring up some behaviours and responses that you haven't understood until now? It might be that you now recognise why your holiday companions maybe struggle with things that you find easy, or even vice versa. And if you come back from your holiday feeling frustrated that perhaps it wasn't the holiday you hoped for or thought it would be, have a think about whether some defence mechanisms had started to creep in. Looking at ourselves at this level can be challenging and unnerving as we develop our awareness, so I'd always encourage that you do this at your own speed. If you feel you need some extra help around this, then I've put together a PDF resource sheet and you can find the link for this in the show notes. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Dynamics of Everyday Life. Please hit the follow button for future episodes and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow me on Instagram at The Dynamics of Everyday Life or find me on LinkedIn at Julia Rogers. I'd love to hear from you and hear your thoughts on dynamics. The Dynamics of Everyday Life is brought to you by Coaching 42 and the fabulous team at the Podcast Boutique.